I do hope you're enjoying these stories about people from the Old Testament. In this lesson, I'm going to begin, it's probably going to be a couple lessons, the story of Abraham, the father of Israel. And of course, when he started life, his name was Abram. So let's begin with Abram, who was living near the city of Ur. His father came to visit him in the fields with his sheep one day. Terah said, "God has spoken to me, Abram. He has told me to head to Canaan. He has greatly blessed our family, and our herds and flocks have multiplied. And people are complaining that they're eating too much of the grazed land and drinking too much of the water. And so I think we should leave. God said it. And I'm going to leave. I would really like it if you would come with me. It would please me greatly." Abram said, "Well, yes, Father. And I've heard people complaining too. Some of them have said, if your flocks and herds grow like your father's, you're going to have problems." So, yeah, I'll go with you. Is the whole family going to go? Terah said, "Well, thank you, my son. I am happy that you will go with me. My son Nahor wishes to remain here to care for my father, for whom I named him Nahor. That pleases me greatly because my father is very old. And I will now ask the son of my deceased son if he wants to go with. Make your plans. Begin preparing your people. We're going to leave in 7 days." Well, just 2 days later, Abram, Nahor, and Lot were all together. And Abram said, "Nahor, I am happy that you will stay with our grandfather. Lot, what have you decided?" Lot said, "In honor of my father, I will support his father and go with you." So Abram and Nahor embraced and sang their farewells and a very emotional goodbye. Nahor pulled Lot aside to give him some advice, including, "Take care of my brother Abram." They chuckled. All the families said their goodbyes, and they divided up provisions and so forth so that, Terah and his clan, his group, would have enough food to get to Canaan. Well, after 3 months of traveling, Terah stopped and said, "Abram, my son, this region is excellent for grazing with plenty of water, and there are not very many people here that have herds and flocks. I've decided we're going to stop here for now. I'm going to call this region Haran to honor my son who has already died." Well, Abram said, "Oh, yes, Father, it's a nice region for our family, that's for sure, and it warms my heart to hear you call it Haran in honor of my brother." Well, 13 years later, Abram went to Lot one day and said, "My dear nephew, my father has passed away. And God spoke to my father, and now he has spoken to me. I'm going to continue the journey we started years ago and will soon leave for the land of Canaan. Do you desire to remain here, or do you wish to go to Canaan with me?" Lot said, "Well, my grandfather started the journey to Canaan because God spoke to him. I was honored to go this far, and now, well, since God has spoken to you also, I'll continue my journey with you." So 1 year later, they're in Canaan. They've been there for a little while. And Abram said, "Lot, this land of Canaan is in the middle of a severe famine." Lot said, "Yes, sir. Yes, sir. But I have heard from a passing caravan that Egypt has plenty of food." Abram said, "Well, that's good news. Let's head that direction. It'll take us 30 days or more to arrive in Egypt because our animals will not be able to travel real fast. And Lot said, "Well, one of my servants is actually from Egypt, and he tells me there's a very difficult desert to cross on the way to Egypt, and some of our animals are going to die on the way." Abram said, "Well, yeah, I see. Let's sell some of our young and some of our old animals that are going to have trouble, and we can sell them as we travel through the region of Canaan." And Lot said, we can leave tomorrow. And Abram said, yes, we will leave tomorrow. Well, 35 days later, Abram stopped to talk to Sarai, his wife. He said, Sarai, my beautiful wife, we're near Egypt, and I'm concerned that the Egyptians might kill me so they could have you for one of them. I want you to tell them you are my sister. Hopefully, they will let me live. Sarai said, I will obey. And Abram then told all his people and Lot's people that Sarai was his sister by family relations, and that was what they should tell any Egyptians they met. So, not too long after arriving in Egypt, Pharaoh indeed heard about the great beauty of Sarai, and he took her into his palace. And then he gave Abram many sheep, cattle, donkeys, camels, and servants because of Sarai. Now this did not please God, so he caused serious diseases to appear on Pharaoh and everyone in his palace. Pharaoh summoned Abram and said, Abram, I summoned you to ask why you said Sarai was your sister. God has told me she is your wife. Abram said, and Pharaoh said, no, don't speak to me. I will give you a great number of animals and servants so that your God will heal all the people he has cursed because of you, but you leave my nation now. So they head back to Canaan. And along the way, it was a hard journey. It took several weeks. And they finally got to Canaan, and they were settled down again in a new spot. And one day Lot came to Abram and said, so my men say your men are unreasonable and not willing to share and cooperate. Abram said, my men? Are you sure you aren't talking about your men? And they both chuckled. Lot said, okay, maybe it's a two-way deal. What are we going to do? Obviously, we have too many animals to stay together. Abram said, well, I tell you what. You pick whatever direction you want to go, and I will head in the opposite direction. Lot said, I like the region of the Jordan River. It reminds me of where we were in Egypt, and it sounds a lot like what we heard about for the Garden of Eden. I would like to go that way. And Abram said, well, that sounds like a really good choice. I guess I'll just keep going north, heading towards the middle of Canaan. May God bless your future. Well, a few weeks later, God appeared to Abram. And he said, Abram, my son, look north. Now, Abram was on a tall mountain. And Abram looked north and smiled as he thought about how beautiful this region was. And God said, look east, Abram. Abram looked east and smiled even bigger at the beautiful green fields leading into even more hills. Before God could speak again, Abram was already looking to the south. And God smiled and said, yes, see how great this place will be as your home? Now look west. Abram looked west and realized how perfect this place would be for him and his people. God said, as far as you can see in every direction, all of this land will one day belong to your family. Well, Abram then bowed face down to the ground and worshiped God. Praise his name. So now, a couple of years later, Abram was sitting in his favorite chair under the awning in front of his tent when he saw a rider off in the distance. The rider was on a camel that could barely even stagger. It looked like it had been ridden hard and was on its last legs. Abram stood up and called for his wife and servants. He had one of his men take a nearby horse to the traveler with instructions to change animals with the man and let him come right away. You bring his camel back slowly. And he told his wife, have the servants prepare some food. Bring some wine from the spring where it was keeping cool. And he told another servant, set up a tent for this rider so he can rest. Well, when the man arrived, he was a young man. And he looked like he'd been riding a long ways and had not taken very many stops. He was clearly exhausted. but he refused to eat until he could give Abram his message. Abram noticed the man's robe was the color of their family. Abram was concerned, but he insisted the young man drink some wine first. And the young man took just a couple of small sips, and seeing that, Abram knew he was a wise man. Somebody who has gone without water for a long time should not drink a lot right away. The young man said, "My name is Etan. I am the son of Barak, who served Lot when he journeyed with you." Abram smiled, remembering a faithful and trusted servant named Barak, who had a son that was not yet a man, although it hadn't been all that long. Etan took a longer drink of wine and then continued, "My master has been taken captive by some raiders. He was living in the city of Sodom, where their king and 4 other kings from that region rebelled against 4 kings of the east that had been ruling that region. And the kings of the east took prisoners, including my master. They headed north to do some more fighting." Well, Abram did not take any time to think about anything. He immediately ordered his chief servant, Eleazar, to gather all his experienced fighting men. He took 318 fighters and prepared to leave. Each man was mounted on a horse and was well armed and very experienced at warfare. Etan insisted he would ride with them, and Abram chuckled when Etan immediately said, "If you leave me behind, I'll follow you on foot." So Abram, he gave him one of his very best horses, and the group left within an hour, during which time Etan had eaten some very tasty food. Sarai was evidently a good cook. They rode at a pace their horses could maintain day and night, with a short break for water now and then. They stopped at midday to give the horses a period of grazing, and then they rode after sunset and until the horses began to tire, and then they slept for half the night and started out before the sun came up, taking advantage of the cool night air, both at sundown and before sunrise. So near the end of the 6th day, a group of people told them, "There's some fighting in the hills just north of here, and we're trying to escape." Abram told them, "You wait here." He divided his men into 2 groups. Abram's men were really impressed with Etan's attitude and endurance. They had tested his fighting ability and were even more impressed. So when Abram laid out his plan to his closest advisors, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre, they suggested he put Etan in charge of one group. Abram rubbed his chin, smiled, and said, "Great idea." So in the middle of the night, they attacked from 2 sides, and Abram's men were outnumbered by quite a bit. But it quickly became a rout. The army of the kings hadn't even posted guards. They were so confident that they could withstand any attack that anyone in this region would mount against them. And they just believed they were invincible. And the shock of the attack caused a few of them to panic and take off. And others saw that and decided to run too. Soon all the army of the kings was running as fast as they could. Well, before that day was over, Abram's men had rescued all the prisoners and everything that had been stolen, and they killed all of the raiders. And of course, with all the rescued people and because of their hard travel to catch up to the invaders, it took them about 3 weeks to reach their homes. Now, on their way home, they came near the city of Salem. The king of Salem was named Melchizedek, and he heard about their story, and he came out of the city to greet them, bringing them some food and wine. He offered a blessing over Abram and his men for rescuing the people of the area near his city. Melchizedek told Abram to leave the people with him and that he could keep all of the rescued property. But Abram refused to accept anything except what his men had eaten and the shares of what was rescued that belonged to Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre, because they were not his men but had joined him in this endeavor. Abram respectfully told Melchizedek that he did not want any man to be able to say, "I made Abram rich." He wanted only what God had blessed him with. Okay, so a few years went by, and one day God appeared to Abram And he said, because you are so faithful to me, I will make your descendants into a mighty nation. Abram said, God, that's not possible. I do not have a son, so everything I own will be inherited by my servant, my longtime faithful servant, the wonderful Eliezer of Damascus. God said, no, Abram, look up at the night sky and count all of the stars. Abram said, that's not possible. God said, exactly right. That's how big your family will become. Abram nodded his head, saying, I understand, and I believe you. And God said, I called you from Ur so you could take possession of this land. Abram said, how can I know all this is true? God said, bring a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old goat, and a 3-year-old ram, plus a dove and a young pigeon. That evening, as Abram fell asleep, God came to him in his dream and said, in 4 generations, your family will live in a foreign land where they will be abused as slaves for 400 years. I will punish that nation and then bring your family out of that nation with a great deal of wealth. However, you will die before those days begin. Now, about 10 years after they left Egypt, Sarai told Abram, husband, I know your God said you would have many descendants, but we are old and we don't even have one child, much less a son. Take my servant Hagar and have a son by her. Abram said, well, Sarai, I had planned on having my children with you, but if you think this is the right thing to do, I guess I will do as you suggest. Well, after a time, Hagar became pregnant. And Sarai came to Abram again and said, husband, it's all your fault. Abram said, but Sarai said, no, Hagar thinks she's better than me now, and she won't do anything I tell her to do. Abram was thinking but not saying, wasn't this her idea? Sarai said, do something about this now. Abram said, okay. Tell you what, you do whatever you want to do about her. She's your maid. So Sarai became quite abusive with Hagar, and Hagar ran away. She hadn't gone very far when she stopped to rest, and she was shocked to see an angel appear in front of her. The angel said, Hagar, you are going to have a son, and he will be the father of a mighty nation. However, all of his brothers will hate him and fight with him. Hagar said, okay. And she returned to Sarai just as the angel told her. So when Hagar gave birth to a son, Abram named him Ishmael. And 13 years later, Abram was sitting in his favorite chair under the awning in front of his tent again, when all of a sudden God was standing in front of him. And God said, I am God Almighty. Remain faithful and always do what is right. My covenant with you will last forever. Everything I have promised you will come true as long as you obey my commands. As a sign of this covenant, every male member of your family, including your servants, must be circumcised. If any male is not circumcised, you must send them away. Abraham said, okay, I understand and I'll obey. And God said, from this day forward, your name will be Abraham, containing the sound of my name. Abraham said, I am honored. I don't know what to say. Thank you, my God. Thank you so very much. God said, my covenant with you will be passed on to your descendants. Abraham said, thank you. May your blessing pass to Ishmael. God said, Sarai will also receive a new name, Sarah, and she will give birth to your son. Hearing that, Abram fell face down to the ground and kind of chuckled to himself as he wondered how a man 100 years old and a woman 90 years old could possibly have a child. God said, yes, Sarah will give you a son and you will name him Isaac. My covenant will pass on to him with all of my promises. I will also bless Ishmael as you asked, He will be the father of 12 rulers and a great nation, but my covenant will be with Isaac, whom will be born next year about this time of year. And God left. Abram immediately circumcised every male in the family and every male servant of the family. Well, not too long later, Abram was sitting in his favorite chair under the awning in front of his tent, as usual, and he saw 3 men walking towards his tent. He rushed to meet them and bowed low. Of course, he recognized God. Abram said, "My Lord, please stop here. Let me provide some water so you can wash your feet while you rest here. I will provide you something to eat as well." The men said, "That'd be nice." Abram rushed over to tell Sarah to use her best flour and bake some bread, and he ran out to his nearest herd, and he selected the best tender young calf, and he told his servant to prepare it immediately. He picked up some curds and milk from the nice cool well, and he fed the men as quickly as food arrived. He served them himself, and then he stood nearby as they ate. The men asked, "Where's Sarah?" Abram said, "She's in the tent right next to you." God said, "I will return next year, and by then Sarah will have given birth to a son." Now Sarah was listening, and she laughed quietly. She knew there was no way that could happen. And God said, Abram, why? Did Sarah laugh? "Nothing is too difficult for me." And Sarah was embarrassed and said, "I didn't laugh." God shaking his head, "Oh, but you did." When the 3 men were ready to leave, Abram walked with them. They stopped at the edge of the hill Abram was living on. The men looked out over the plain below them, and off in the distance they could see Sodom. As they stood there, the 3 men walked a short distance away from Abraham. And God, speaking to his 2 companions, said, "Should I tell Abraham what I'm going to do? I mean, after all, I've chosen him, and he honors me." God's companions nodded their heads, and God then raised his voice, speaking loud enough so Abraham could hear him clearly. He said, "The sins of Sodom and Gomorrah are so offensive that I'm going to go there myself, and I'm going to destroy both cities." Abraham paused, thinking about his nephew Lot. He still lived in Sodom. He walked over to God. Abram said, "If there are 50 righteous people there, will you kill everyone? I know you wouldn't do that. Killing good people with evil people? No." God said, "If I find 50 good people in Sodom, I will spare the entire city." Abram said, "Now I know I have no right to ask, but if there are 45, will you spare the city?" God said, "If there are 45 good people, I will not destroy the city." Abram said, "What if there's just 40 good people?" God said, "If I find 40, I will spare the entire city." Abram said, "What if there's just 30? And God said, "For 30, I will spare them." Abram said, "May I be so bold as to ask once more, what if there are just 20? With that, God said, "With 20, I will spare them." Abram said, "Please, please, please, forgive me for asking one more time. What if there are only 10 good people?" God said, "If I find 10 good people, I'll spare the city." After saying that, God left, and Abram went back to his tent. Now the 3 men continued on to Sodom, and they arrived just before sundown. And Lot found them in the city plaza, and after some pleading, he finally persuaded them to come to his home for the night. Now the men of Sodom beat on Lot's door, telling him, "Send the strangers out for them to have sex with them." Lot tried to dissuade them, but they just told him he wasn't one of them and he better do what they wanted. Well, in the morning, God said, "Lot, I am going to destroy Sodom." Lot said, "Please don't destroy our city." God said, "The decision's made. I will destroy Sodom. Leave quickly if you want to live." Lot said, "Can my family run to that small town in the hills on the edge of the plain?" God said, "Yes, but you better hurry, and when you leave the city, don't look back." Now, Lot pleaded with his daughter's fiancés, but they both refused to leave the city. Lot and his wife and 2 daughters all fled with just what they could carry and still run. As they left the city, Lot's wife had second thoughts about leaving their home, and she looked back. When she looked back, she turned into a pillar of salt. So, sometime later, Abraham and Abimelech, they had a talk. But we're going to wait for the next lesson to cover this. God bless you. Take care. Bye now.